All right, let's talk a little bit about American reform movements of the early 19th century. One thing we should point out, although it seems a little odd perhaps to today's leftists, is that what we might think of as the left of American politics, the far left of American politics in the early 19th century, was largely a religious movement, and it was antinomian Christianity that drove abolitionism, feminism, the peace movement, and other, even the temperance movement and other reform movements of that period. Now, and antinomianism, which we might just define as, or translate as against the law-ism, is basically the idea, it's a heresy, but it's the idea that each person is answerable only to God and not to church authorities or state authorities or any kind of authority, and obviously that has an anarchistic streak. But when William Lloyd Garrison, the great American abolitionist, and many others started in with their condemnation of slavery, they did so from an explicitly religious point of view. Indeed, in his early writings, Garrison seems to be something of a religious fanatic, and what he asserts, essentially, is that slavery is incompatible with the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament, especially the Sermon on the Mount, but also the Golden Rule, and so on. So one feature of this is it may be strategic. He's appealing to the religious conscience of Americans to try to end slavery or to achieve immediate abolition, or even the separation of the North from the South. Garrison advocated that the northern states should secede from the slave states. Rather interesting, since it ended up being the other way around. For Garrison and also for, say, people like John Brown, slavery was not only an evil institution, it was the acme, the essence of all evil. That is, every evil act claims ownership in another person, or violates their individual autonomy. That's what evil is, essentially. And slavery is just a systematic institutionalization of this idea of the use of people as objects. You might relate this to Kantian ethics, where treating people as objects rather than as subjects is, again, the essence of evil. So, they rejected slavery on those kinds of grounds, and they rejected the state on those grounds. Not only because the state that Garrison was dealing with supported slavery in certain ways, and Garrison actually burned copies of the Constitution and called it a pact with the devil because it recognized slavery, at least according to him, but also because the state itself amounts to slavery, because it rests on coercion. That is, it claims ownership in people, and thus, like I say, they drew the anarchist implications from the religious orientation and from the abolitionist orientation, and they called for self-sovereignty. That is, if no one can own another, one way to put that moral principle is that each person is the owner of themselves. Now, obviously, that's an individualist idea that emerges from the Protestant Reformation. So the alternative to slavery is self-sovereignty, and that entails that the state is evil or illegitimate. One figure who I've studied pretty elaborately on this is the newspaper editor from New Hampshire named Nathaniel Peabody Rogers, who held all these positions He was a pacifist, that is, he advocated non-resistance in the parlance of the time. He was an abolitionist, radical abolitionist, and he was an anarchist. And early in his career, for religious reasons. Let me read you one passage from Rogers' writings. Political action is of one spirit and intent with military. The weapons of both are violence, and the instrumentalities of both bloodshed and murder. What is government, after which all political action is aiming, but an armed battery? What is its voice but the report of cannon, its sanctions but the bayonet and halter? Good farmers are learning that there is a better way to treat their cattle than by blows. The hostler of intelligence and kindness is ceasing to maul his noble horse. They are leaving off the practice of breaking steers and colts for the reason that it is cruel, undeserved by the horse, and unworthy of the employer, and because the whole horse or ox is better than a broken one. Political action is unfit even for brute animals. Is it fitter for man? Is humanity less susceptible of moral influences than what we call brutality? A politician is but a man-driver, a human teamster. His business is to control men by the whip and the goad. His occupation would be unlawful and inexpedient even toward cattle. And of course the idea of cattle or chattel is related to slavery. And one thing we can see here, actually, believe it or not, Rogers was an advocate of animal rights, among other reforms. Out of abolitionism of this stripe emerges a whole series of reform movements that have been fundamental to American history, especially feminism. And, you know, people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, the Grim K sisters, and many others, early American feminists, began their activities within the anti-slavery movement. And, you know, their critique of marriage was exactly on these grounds. That is, marriage, as it was defined legally at that time, amounted to the ownership of women by men. Again, this is an expression, this is a violation of the basic moral principle of self-sovereignty, or the idea that evil amounts to a claim of ownership in other persons. As this movement progressed, it became ever more secular. And God tended to drop off the scene a little bit. This is true in Rogers, and it's true even in Garrison, and it's true among the feminists as well. And as that movement secularizes, I mean, one symptom of that is in the transcendentalists like Thoreau and Emerson, and that's where we'll go from here.